you go. Tô trajadão, tão, 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 tão. Tô trajadão, tão, 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 tão. Tô trajadão, tão, 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 tão.
Let's kick things off tonight with a story that some of you probably heard or will study soon in school, and that is Romeo and Juliet. It's often thought of as the ultimate love story. A young boy, reckless and passionate, chases after forbidden love. He meets a girl from his family's worst enemy. And after only knowing each other for less than 24 hours, they're ready to risk everything for their forbidden love. They face danger, secrets, and the thrill of doing whatever it takes to be together. If you're not familiar with Romeo and Juliet, it really is an amazing and dramatic story. In it, two teenagers meet at a party, fall for each other fast, and within hours, they're sneaking around, making plans, and talking about forever. At one point, Romeo declares, "Did my heart love till now? Forswear at sight, for I ne'er saw true beauty till this night." In just moments, he is convinced that he has found the one. It was destiny. It was fate. It was meant to be. Or was it? To say the very least, Romeo and Juliet got swept up and things got very intense and exciting pretty quickly. But was it love? Or was it just lust? What Romeo and Juliet felt was strong and powerful, and my guess is that in a lot of ways, most of us can relate. I'd say most of us would probably admit to having had strong feelings of attraction for someone else, and if you haven't yet, there's a really good chance that you will at some point in your life, and that's normal. Now, I don't want to spoil it for you, for those of you who have not taken 9th grade English yet, but Romeo and Juliet's 24-hour romance ended in absolute tragedy. Now, I'm not saying that every teen romance will end like this. I'm not even saying that those feelings you feel towards someone else are bad, or that you should avoid relationships as a teenager, but I am saying that what you do with those feelings matters. So, last midweek, we kicked off our series, All the Feels, by talking about the power of our emotions, and starting with a conversation about anger and how it can motivate us for good, but if left unchecked, it can turn into something incredibly damaging like hatred or bitterness. Remember, emotions are a part of how God made us. But the real challenge is learning how to process those emotions and expressions in positive ways. So tonight, we are going to be talking about attraction and how it can lead us to either love or lust. Much like Romeo and Juliet, it can be easy to get swept up in these intense feelings. But when this happens, how do you tell the difference between genuine, selfless love and lust, which is easy to confuse for love, but tends to be more selfish in nature? So just like we said last time about anger, our feelings or our attraction is not wrong. What matters is what we do with those feelings. So instead of asking whether these feelings are good or bad, I think the better question each person can ask is, where do I want these strong feelings of attractions to lead me? So to help, I want to look at a passage where Jesus addresses this issue head on. So if you would, look at Matthew chapter 5 and verse 27 with me. You have heard the commandment that says, you must not commit adultery. All right, so let's pause here for just a second and make sure we're all on the same page. Adultery is when a married person breaks the commitment that they have made to their spouse by being emotionally, romantically, or physically involved in an appropriate way with someone else. So basically, adultery is cheating on your husband or wife. Now you may be thinking, hold on, wait a minute. I'm not married, or I'm not even close to that yet. What does this have to do with me? And that's a fair question. In fact, it's likely that the people in the crowd were also trying to figure out a way for Jesus' words to not apply to them either. But you see, back in Jesus' time, it was pretty common for people to hear a command like, you must not commit adultery, and they think to themselves, sweet, I haven't committed adultery, so I'm good. But if you were here last time, when we talked about when Jesus started out by saying, you have heard that our ancestors were told you must not murder, but then he ended up talking about anger, he's doing something similar here. And if there's anything in the world that might apply to a group of teenagers, it's what he's about to say. So let's back up. Let's start this passage again. Matthew chapter 5, verse 27 says, you have heard the commandment that says you must not commit adultery. But I say, anyone who even looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So if your eye, even your good eye, causes you to lust, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your hand, even your strong hand, causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. See what I mean? He starts talking about adultery, but he ends up talking about how it's better to gouge our eyes out than to look at another person lustfully. To say the very least, I think he escalated that very quickly. But what is Jesus doing here? What does he want us to know? And when you add this to what we talked about last week, you might start noticing a pattern that Jesus doesn't want us to just focus on our actions, just only what people see. He wants us to go deeper and to consider our intentions. So in this case, that's why he said, anyone who even looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Now, depending on who was in the crowd, I have to imagine at this point they were probably asking some of the same questions that you might be asking or I would be asking, like, whoa there, I'm fine not cheating on my spouse, but you can't possibly expect me to look and not even think about it, right? Or I'm not even married, so this absolutely has no application to me whatsoever. Or even, you said men shouldn't look at women lustfully, so is it cool if it's the other way around? All right, well, let's take care of the easy one right here. When asking whether or not what Jesus said applies to people who aren't even married yet, remember this word, anyone who even looks. Yeah, I'd argue that this includes teenagers who aren't even married yet. And of course, for anyone that was hoping that this only applies to the guys in the room, unfortunately, anyone still means anyone. Jesus was taking a rule that applied to the actions of a specific group of people in a very specific circumstance and broadened it to include the intentions of everyone. But in true Jesus fashion, he doesn't stop there, right? He even went so far as to say that if something as small as a look can lead us to sin in our minds or with our bodies, that we should deal with it right away and do whatever it takes to avoid that sin. Now, I have to admit that Jesus uses some shockingly strong language here. I don't think anyone was expecting him to say that it's better to lose a body part than to allow ourselves to be controlled by lust. But you can bet that this sounded just as extreme to the crowd that Jesus was teaching as it does to us. They probably had a lot of the same questions that we might. Does he really mean that I should gouge my eye out or cut off my hand? Now, even though it sounds extreme, Jesus is pointing out that lust has a tendency to get out of control very quickly. like throwing dirty laundry in the corner of your room, only to never take it out and to keep adding to it day after day after day until it eventually takes over your entire room and you can't even tell that a person is living in that room. And it just gets out of hand. And that's what Jesus is saying here. Once it takes hold, lust can grow to the point that it controls you. That's why Jesus is warning us that it's better to catch lust before it even has a chance to grow to the point that it feels impossible to deal with. So this wasn't an easy teaching for the crowd, and it's not an easy teaching for us, but I'm pretty sure that that's exactly why it's so important. So I don't know if you're like me, but whenever I'm trying to learn something challenging, I often catch myself just trying to push through it so I can move on to the next thing. But the problem is that when I do that, I end up missing some of the most important parts. So I don't want us to rush through it. I want to point out a few things, a few of the most important ideas for us to understand from this passage. So the first thing that has to do with the difference between love and lust tonight is this. Number one, love builds up, but lust objectifies. Now, you want to know the difference between love and lust? Love is selfless. It involves putting the needs and well-being of another person ahead of your own. And because that's not genuinely our default thing, love can actually be a lot of work. It can be incredibly rewarding, but the truth is, it can also be very challenging. Lust, on the other hand, is not selfless at all. Actually, lust is selfish. Instead of putting someone else's needs and well-being above your own, lust is all about what I like and what I want and how I feel. Over and over throughout the Gospels, Jesus taught us that love is about putting others first. But in pretty much every way, lust is the exact opposite of that. And earlier we said that the question we should be asking is, where do I want these strong feelings of attraction to lead me? The problem is that love and lust lead to two very different places. Because love is selfless, when you genuinely love someone, that motivates you to do whatever you can to build that person up. But lust, because lust is selfish, it can convince you that the only reason that other person has value is because of how they make you feel. And if I remember anything from every relationship that I've ever had or ever saw when I was your age, feelings can change in a heartbeat. So the second thing we can learn is this: lust begins in the heart. Jesus challenges us to see that sin isn't just about our actions. It's also about our intentions. And that's why lust is so tricky. So to help illustrate this, I'd like to point your attention to the nationally acclaimed 2004 action thriller, National Treasure, which also just happens to star an actual National Treasure, Nicolas Cage. But now, actions are easy to identify, right? You either stole the Declaration of Independence in order to find hidden treasure, or you didn't, right? There's really no in between. But intentions are completely different. If you think about stealing the Declaration of Independence and then plan to steal the Declaration of Independence, there's literally no way anyone would know unless you actually try to steal it, right? Lust is the same way. You can lust after a person without them or anyone else ever knowing about it. That's exactly why lust is so dangerous. You see, since no one else knows about it, it's really easy to convince yourself that it's not a big deal because it doesn't actually harm anyone. But it sounds to me like Jesus is arguing that when we start thinking of others in ways that treats them like objects that only exist to make us feel good, it has a way of eating at us from the inside. It's almost like it breaks us down from the inside. You see, what's going on in your heart is incredibly important to God. even if no one else can see it. Check out what King Solomon said in Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23 about why it's so important to keep our hearts from dwelling on things like lust. Proverbs 4:23 says, "Guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life." Both Solomon and Jesus knew that whatever we let control our hearts will ultimately one day guide our actions. Which leads us to the third thing that I want to make sure that we learn from this passage is number 3, lust can lead to even more dangerous territory. Jesus used strong language here to show us how unchecked desires can turn into even bigger problems in our lives. All right, let's look again at Matthew chapter 5 and focus on verses 29 through 30. So if your eye, even your good eye, causes you to lust, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your hand, even your stronger hand, causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. Jesus literally said it's better to get rid of a body part that's leading us to sin than to continue in sin and do nothing about it. Okay, I'll be the first to admit that yes, this sounds a bit extreme. And it's probably a good idea for me to tell you that Jesus was known as using hyperbole language or exaggerated language from time to time in order to make a point. So no, he doesn't actually want anyone to gouge their eyes out or cut off their hands. But Jesus does want us to recognize that hidden sin can have profound consequences. Letting lust take control can lead us to pornography, the blurring of appropriate sexual boundaries, and other potential dangerous behavior. But hidden sin also has a tricky way of convincing us that hiding our true selves from others is actually a good thing. But it's not, because the result is we end up feeling like we are alone in our struggles. And if you're there, I want you to know that nothing could be further from the truth. Lust is something that pretty much everyone struggles with. Keeping it in check is a daily challenge, and feeling like we need to face that challenge alone only makes it more difficult. So what can we do if we want to be the kind of people who aren't going to let lust control our thoughts and actions? Again, I don't want to sugarcoat anything, and I'm going to tell you that it will not be easy, but I do have a few steps that I think might help you set it yourself in the right direction. And the first is this: memorize Proverbs 4:23. I know this sounds a bit basic, but memorizing passage of scripture is to help you overcome temptations and sin. Memorizing this short passage is a great step to remind yourself of why the fight is worth it. Anybody remember what it says? Guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life. Now you could write it on a note card, a post-it note, put it on your mirror. You can use this verse as maybe a lock screen on your phone, but there are a million ways that you can remind yourself of this verse each day. So do whatever it takes to keep it in front of you. The second thing that we can do is this: evaluate the media you are consuming. Because a person of love starts with guarding our hearts. And a good place to start at guarding our hearts is by paying attention to and evaluating what we allow our eyes to see and our minds to absorb. Experts have argued back and forth for decades about how much the movies we watch, the games we play, and the music we listen to impact our thoughts and our behaviors. And I'm not going to pretend to know more than them, but I think it would be interesting for each of us to simply ask ourselves the question: does the media that I consume hurt or help me in my struggle with lust? Or better yet, does the media I consume hurt or help me in my walk with God? Maybe there are some accounts that you should unfollow. There might be some shows or some songs that have content that make your struggle with lust more difficult, and limiting or even removing them could help guard your heart. Seriously, my goal here is not to tell you to stop watching stuff that you shouldn't or listening to things that you shouldn't. I just want to encourage you to be intentional about what you let into your heart. And the last thing that we can do is this, number 3, encourage each other. Look, if there's any group of people on the planet that are going to struggle with lust, it's teenagers. Hormones are raging, whether you want to admit it or not. And now the chances are, as you go through middle school, junior high, and high school, you'll hear a lot of people tell you a lot of things about how you should think and how you should behave, especially when it comes to dating and relationships and sexuality. And yeah, you will hear some of that stuff from me, but even more important, I want you to hear that you are not alone. I'm not saying that you need to spill your guts and share all of your deepest, darkest secrets with me or each other, but I am saying that I think these conversations are an incredible opportunity for each of you to realize that you are not alone. So I'll say 2 things tonight, and we're done. The message will be yours. Jesus doesn't want us to just focus on our actions. Again, only the things that people can see. He wants us to go deeper and to consider our intentions, our hearts. What's going on in your heart is incredibly important to God, even if no one else can see it.